Hey guys, JLBZombie here and welcome back to another ranking video. So as promised, I'm going to be ranking the Scream franchise as I have now seen the newest installment in the series. So let's not waste any time, let's slash our way through this franchise. So coming in at number 5 is Scream 3. It was the 2000s and the slasher movies were not what they used to be back in the 80s and mid 90s. The Scream franchise wasn't done and Scream 2 got its sequel in 2000. For me, the third installment in the franchise is the weakest. I'm sure the movie went through production issues, and for me it doesn't feel like the other two movies before it. But saying that, it does have its moments. I like the opening sequence, but one thing I really can't settle with this movie is the voice changing device. The fact that now Ghostface can mimic anyone's voice, and sure, yeah, I get it, they wanted to try something new. But it doesn't settle with me. And without fail, another thing I always forget about this movie is that Carrie Fisher makes a cameo. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's always nice to see Carrie Fisher in any movie, but I always seem to forget that she's in Scream 3. And speaking of cameos, Jay and Silent Bob also appear in this movie, and then in the following year, when they had their own movie, Kevin Smith and Jason Mewes would feature Wes Craven and Carrie Fisher in their movie. Another thing I really don't like about this movie is that from time to time, Sidney will have visions of her dead mother. To me, that really didn't feel like a Scream movie, instead it felt more of a haunted ghost type movie. I think Neve Campbell is good as Sidney in this one. Truth be told, I like every portrayal of Sidney. The same goes for Gale and Dewey. It's great to see Jamie Kennedy make a brief return as Randy as he tells the gang about the rules of a trilogy. The reveal of the killer in Scream 3 I think is one of the weakest. As it turns out, there's a director named Roman who is attempting to make the third installment in the Stab franchise, and not only does he turn out to be the killer, but is also Sidney's half-brother.
And brother.
So for me, Scream 3 is the weakest in the franchise, but has a few good moments. From this point onwards, I think the remaining movies are great, so let's continue with the list. Coming in at number 4 is Scream 4. The fourth installment in the series was released in 2011 and was unfortunately Wes Craven's last movie. At this point in the story, everybody has moved on. Dewey is no longer a deputy, he's a sheriff and is now married to Gale, and Sidney is visiting Woodsboro to do a book signing. Other than our main cast of original characters, my favourite character in this movie is Kirby. She's a fantastic new character. There's a sequence which sort of harkens back to the original with one of our new main characters outside taped up on a chair, and Kirby has to attempt to save him by naming a horror movie remake, and she just absolutely loses it. She ends up calling out every horror movie remake out there. That was definitely my favourite scene that featured Kirby.
I got it right. I was fucking right.
Ghostface in this movie is now being played by two characters, whereas in Scream 3 he was only played by just Roman. Once the two killers are revealed, that is when the film really kicks into gear, and is just so tense. One of the new main characters is Sidney's cousin, Jill Roberts, who is also the first cousin of Roman from Scream 3. Jill reveals to her that she is the new killer alongside Charlie Walker, who reveals himself to Kirby after she rescues him. Charlie's motive, among others, is to remake the original Woodsboro murders, whereas Jill's motive is to have the same amount of fame as Sidney, and she goes full on. She intends to become the last survivor, and by the end ends up killing Charlie, stabbing Sidney, and shooting her own boyfriend. Jill goes absolutely crazy and ends up stabbing herself in the shoulder, ripping out her own hair using her dead boyfriend's hand, also scratching her face. She throws herself against the wall and finally jumping backwards into a glass table, lying on the floor next to Sidney. Now usually the climax of these movies would end there, but Scream 4 takes it a step further. Jill goes to hospital and she finds out that Sidney is still alive and attempts to finish her off. By the end of this movie, Sidney has the best one-liner she's ever delivered in the entire franchise.
You forgot the first rule of remakes, Jill. Don't fuck with the original.
The latest installment in the Scream franchise takes place 25 years after the original, and the movie totally took me by surprise. This time the story focuses on two sisters, Sam and Tara. The opening of the movie played out like any other Scream opening. Tara gets a phone call from Ghostface and gets attacked before the title card, and for the first time, surprisingly, she didn't die. She's the first victim in the franchise to survive the opening attack. Sam, on the other hand, Tara's sister, holds a deep dark secret which I really didn't see coming. Spoiler alert for anyone who hasn't seen the new installment. Billy Loomis is the father of Sam. She will from time to time have visions of her father who's telling her to kill. Because of this, I was so suspicious of Sam. I didn't trust her. I was certain she would turn out to be one of the killers, but by the end of the movie, I was mistaken. Moving on to legacy characters now, this movie spends less time with them and decides to focus more on the new characters, which I actually don't mind. In this movie, Sydney has become a mother of two, and she gets a call from Dewey after he finds out that a new series of murders has happened. Gale and Dewey have now divorced, and there's a fantastic moment after Dewey calls Sydney. He attempts to call Gale, but instead just texts her, and he puts in little small talk. It's so subtle, but I love how David Arquette plays Dewey in this movie. Now, whilst I'm on the topic of Dewey, I really cannot rank this franchise without talking about one specific scene that involves Dewey. So again, this is a massive spoiler for anyone who hasn't seen the movie. Dewey and Sam team up and come to the rescue, and by the way, that was an amazing scene, really awesome. They could have all escaped together, but Dewey felt the need to finish off Ghostface, who had been knocked out. So as Dewey approaches, Ghostface has the upper hand and pretty much guts Dewey with 2 knives. Whilst this is happening, Dewey's phone is going off and it's Gale trying to contact him. It's a really heartbreaking scene, especially when this character that we love has gone through so many injuries throughout the franchise and has survived through them for so long, but unfortunately, not today. So after hearing the unfortunate death of Dewey, Sydney comes back to town and reunites with Gale. Now the two of them are together, they are determined to put a stop to all this madness once and for all. So moving on to the reveal of the killers, it turns out that Richie, Sam's boyfriend, and a character named Amber have been behind it all. Amber's reveal was a huge shock moment and so sudden. She, along with Jill from Scream 4, are so damn crazy. Amber's motive is that she wants to revive the Stab franchise's tarnished brand with a real-life requel. Richie, on the other hand, wants to recreate Stab 8 as a real-life requel. Which brings me on to the kills. They are the most brutal. It's probably the bloodiest in the franchise. And there's a great moment of suspense where a character named Wes, who's the son of Sheriff Hicks, is home alone. And there's so many moments where the music begins to rise and it makes you think that Ghostface is going to pop out, but it leaves you hanging until the very moment where he, or she, does pop out. Also, whilst on the topic of this scene, the film has a great use of practical effects and uses very little CGI. So overall, Scream 2022, or Scream 5, however you want to call it, is a very solid film in the franchise. So coming in at number 2 is the movie that usually ranks at the top of most people's lists, and that's the one that started it all, which of course is Scream. The movie came about really when the horror movie genre began to die down. The film, in a way, reinvented the horror genre, and Ghostface became one of the most recognisable slashers in the horror genre. And of course, Scream was responsible for the creation of Scary Movie. The opening of this movie is the most iconic and memorable in the franchise, having Drew Barrymore on one of the many posters indicating that she will be one of the film's main stars, but then it takes a massive twist and by 12 minutes into the film, her character Casey is gutted and hung from a tree. The opening alone just really sets the tone for the rest of the films in the series. Neve Campbell is great in every single one of these movies. She's definitely my favourite final girl. The same goes for Gale and Dewey. David Arquette and Courtney Cox play them brilliantly in each instalment. This movie has a great cast of characters, but the character that really shines is Stu, played by Matthew Lillard.
I'm getting another beer. You want one? Yeah, sure. I'll be right back.
He is constantly joking around and cracking jokes, and he's just brilliant.
No, I don't at all. No.
Skeet Ulrich, who plays Billy Loomis, Sydney's boyfriend, is great in this film also. And finally, Rose McGowan, who plays Tatum, is really good too. One of my favourite moments in this movie comes right here.
Damn little shits.
What'd you call me? Huh?
Not your friend.
Another memorable scene is the rules scene. Every horror movie fan watching this movie is basically Randy. Now, the reveal of the killers in this movie is the best in the whole franchise, I think. It turns out that Stu and Billy are the killers, and it's one of the greatest horror movie twists of all time. Billy's motive is that he wants revenge on Maureen Prescott, Sidney's mother, for causing his parents to separate. Although at some point in the film he did say that it is scarier when there is no motive. Even after Stu reveals himself to Sidney, he is still crazy and cracking jokes. And some of Matthew Lillard's lines were ad-libbed.
Fucking hit me with the phone, Dick! My mom and dad are gonna be so mad. I always had a thing for you, sick bitch.
Overall, Scream is a perfect slasher movie, and personally I think is one of Wes Craven's best movies. It set the benchmark for many more slasher movies to come. It's so self-aware and full of Easter eggs from other horror movies. It's quotable and definitely a movie to be watched with a crowd of horror fans. So obviously, taking the top spot on my list is Scream 2, released in 1997. This movie has always remained my favourite in the franchise. I love how the film takes place at college and there's a new unknown killer on the loose, and the opening of the movie is one of the best, next to the original. A couple go into a cinema to watch the premiere of Stab, a movie which is taking events from the first Scream movie. When they go into the cinema, it is wild. There are people dressed as Ghostface, swinging knives, running up and down the aisles. It's crazy. But then the real Ghostface shows up, and that's when shit hits the fan. I love how this movie introduces the characters from the first movie. When we see Sidney, she now has caller ID. Gale has now written a book titled The Woodsboro Murders, which has now been adapted into the movie Stab. Dewey comes back to investigate and keep a close eye on Sidney as he tells her about a new murder which has taken place. Now, when Dewey first meets Gale in this movie, he's on bad terms with her after she wrote about him in her book. Dewey didn't like what she wrote, but he forgives her eventually. Randy from the first movie returns and is now a film student. How appropriate. There's a brilliant sequence where the class are debating over movie sequels and James Cameron is brought up with Terminator 2 and Aliens. Randy is on the verge of not liking movie sequels and is attempting to forget the events of the original movie. One of the biggest shock moments in this movie is the death of Randy. He gets jumped by Ghostface and pulled into Gale's news van and brutally murdered. Eventually his body is found by Gale. Moving on to Ghostface and the reveal, like before, there are two killers and they turn out to be Mickey, a student at the college who was in Randy's film class and hung around with him, and Sidney, whose motive is to basically gain infamy for the murders, and the other killer is a big reveal, as the killer turned out to be Mrs. Loomis, Billy's mother. Her motive, of course, is obvious. She wants revenge because of her son's death, and she was the one who killed Randy because at that moment he made a remark about Billy. She also wanted to frame Mickey as being the one and only killer, but that ultimately failed. Sidney also has a new boyfriend named Derek, who is very much in love with her, and is not the Billy Loomis type, although at times the movie will sort of pull the is he or isn't he the killer sort of thing. At one point Sidney actually believed for a moment that Derek was the killer, but then he's shot by Mickey and Derek's dying words to Sidney were, "I would never hurt you." The climax of the movie is solid, and yet again Sidney gets a great one-liner before the major climax begins.
Yeah? Well, you're forgetting one thing about Billy Loomis.
What's that?
I fucking killed him. Piece of shit.
It's in this movie where she really does become a badass. The sequel Scream 2 will always be my favourite movie in the franchise. There's something about it that I love. It for me stands above all the other movies in the series. I did think that Scream 2 would drop upon watching the new Scream movie, but no, it remained in its place. Who knows, maybe in time it may drop a place or two, but for now it continues to slash its way at the top spot. No. So guys, that has been my ranking of the Scream franchise. Do you agree with me? Do you disagree with me? Let me know in the comments down below. If you're new to my channel and you like what you see, hit that subscribe button and don't forget to click the notification bell to stay notified when I upload future content. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a big thumbs up, I'd really appreciate it. And on that note guys, I will see you in the next video, and as always, take care.